The red dust of San Miguel Crossing settled on everything like dried blood. It coated the window panes of Heart and Rail Bank, dulled the brass nameplate, and gathered in the creases of the foreclosure notices tacked to the board outside. The church bell rang noon, each strike dry as kindling. Abigail Hart stood behind the teller's window, white gloves pristine against the ledger's yellowed pages. Her husband's voice carried from the office measured, cordial, final. Another family's fate sealed with ink and wax. She kept her eyes on the columns of numbers, each entry a life reduced to debt and interest. The bank door opened. Wind followed the stranger in, lifting papers from the counter. He was all trail dust and worn leather, hat pulled low, spurs singing against the floorboards. Water, that's all he asked for. Voice rough as creek stones. "The well's out back," she said, not looking up. Town rules were clear about drifters. He nodded, turned to go. Through the window. She watched him cross to where the widow Martinez stood with her 3 children, their possessions piled on a cart. The youngest, maybe 6, clutched a corn-husk doll. Silas's men were nailing the foreclosure notice to their door. The stranger's hand went to his saddlebag. Abigail's fingers tightened on her pen, but he only pulled out a canteen, offered it to the widow. The woman shook her head, pride stiff in her spine, even as tears tracked through the dust on her face. "Ma'am," the stranger's voice carried, "no shame in water." The bank clock ticked. Abigail watched the widow drink, watched her pour some into her palm for the baby. The stranger said something low. The widow's shoulders eased a fraction. Silas emerged from his office, Sheriff Briggs trailing like a hound. Her husband's gray suit was immaculate despite the heat, gold watch chain catching the light. He surveyed the scene outside with the satisfaction of a man counting assets. "Mrs. Hart," his tone never varied, whether addressing her or a debtor. "The Copper River Ranch papers need witnessing." She rose, smoothed her skirts. Routine as morning coffee, another property transferred, another family displaced. The stranger was walking back toward the bank as she passed the window. Their eyes met for half a heartbeat. His were gray as winter sky, steady, knowing. She looked away first. In Silas's office, the papers lay spread across mahogany. The Johansson family ranch, 40 acres of good grazing land along the river. They'd missed 2 payments after the drought killed half their herd. Silas's pen scratched across the deed transfer. "Sign here, my dear." The gloves made her signature awkward. She'd learned not to remove them. A lady's hands stayed covered. Silas reminded her, like everything else about their marriage, it was a matter of maintaining proper appearances. Through the office window, she saw the stranger watering his horse at the trough, a bay mare, thin but cared for. He ran his hand along her neck, checking for saddle sores. The gentleness in the gesture made something twist beneath Abigail's corset stays. "The railroad appreciates our expedience," Silas said, blotting the ink. "Progress demands sacrifice." She nodded, mute. 2 years of marriage had taught her the value of silence. Her father's debts had bought this union her family's honor for Silas's money. A fair trade, everyone agreed. Everyone except the bride. But virgin daughters didn't get votes in such matters. The stranger was gone when she returned to her window. Only dust devils spinning down Main Street, past the saloon and Fletcher's Dry Goods, past the narrow houses where the railroad workers bunked 4 to a room. The town pulsed with the rhythm of progress, steam whistles and hammering steel, the chink of coins across her counter. Late afternoon brought the usual parade of debtors. Mrs. Chen from the laundry, counting out coins worn smooth. Tom Bradley, hat in hand, begging another week's extension on his feed store loan. She recorded each transaction in her careful script, the adding machine clicking like bones. "Please, Mrs. Hart." Bradley's hands shook. "The shipment's coming Tuesday. I can pay then." She glanced toward Silas's closed door. "The terms were clear. Mr. Bradley, payment was due today." "My children." We'll learn the importance of meeting obligations. Silas stood in his doorway, pocket watch open. Sheriff Briggs will assist you with vacating the premises tomorrow. Bradley's face crumpled. He shuffled out, shoulders bent under more than age. Abigail's pen hovered over the ledger. In the margin, nearly invisible, she wrote Tuesday shipment check, morning delivery. The bank closed at 5 sharp. She tallied the day's receipts while Silas reviewed tomorrow's foreclosures. The list was longer than usual. Harvest season meant paying or perishing. Through the window, she watched the sun sink toward the desert, painting everything the color of dried blood. That's when she saw him again. The stranger stood at the corner of the depot, talking with someone in the shadows. Money changed hands, not much, a few bills. He tucked them into his vest and turned. For a moment, she thought he'd look her way. Instead, he headed toward the boarding house, spurs ringing a lonely rhythm. Abigail. Silas locked the safe, pocketed the key. We're dining with Judge Palmer tonight. Wear the blue silk. Yes, husband. At home, Silas's house. She never thought of it as hers. She drew her bath and laid out the required dress. The blue silk had been her wedding gown, modified for evening wear. She'd stood frozen as a doll while the seamstress pinned and tucked, erasing every trace of that awful day. The water was tepid. Everything in San Miguel Crossing was lukewarm water, lukewarm food, lukewarm marriage bed where Silas visited monthly to attempt his conjugal rights. He always failed, blaming her coldness, then returned to his own room. She'd learned not to apologize. It only made him try harder. She dressed carefully. Corset, chemise, stockings, petticoats, layer upon layer of propriety. The blue silk whispered against her skin like accusations. In the mirror, a banker's wife stared back, posture perfect, expression serene, gloves spotless white. At dinner, Judge Palmer held forth about the railroad's promise. His wife simpered and agreed. Silas calculated profit margins between courses. Abigail cut her meat into precise squares and thought about water, the stranger offering his canteen, the widow's grateful tears, the simple grace of quenching thirst. Mrs. Hart. The judge's wife leaned close, reeking of lavender toilet water. You must be so proud. Your husband's bank is civilizing this wasteland. Indeed, the word tasted like dust. They walked home under stars sharp as glass. Silas gripped her elbow, steering her around puddles that didn't exist. At their gate, he paused. That drifter today, if he returns, alert the sheriff. Of course. We can't have that element corrupting our town. His fingers tightened. You understand, my dear. Perfectly. Inside, she unpinned her hair while Silas wound his pocket watch. The routine of marriage, each movement prescribed, each word weighed. He kissed her forehead, dry lips barely grazing skin. Good night, Mrs. Hart. Good night, husband. His door closed. The lock clicked. She sat at her dressing table, studying her gloved hands. Beneath the white kid leather, her fingers ached from gripping the pen, from holding herself still, from not reaching out when the widow wept. Through her window, a coyote howled. The sound carried across the desert, wild and grieving. She thought of the stranger Jesse. She'd heard someone call him at the depot. Jesse Crow, a name like smoke, likely to disappear with morning wind. She removed one glove. Slowly, her hand looked foreign pale, soft, useless. Not the hand of a woman who'd once helped her mother plant kitchen gardens, who'd milked cows and kneaded bread. This was a banker's wife's hand, good only for signing papers that destroyed lives. The coyote called again, somewhere in the boarding house. Jesse Crow was probably cleaning his pistols or counting his meager pay. A drifter's life, no home, no ties, no white gloves to strangle the soul. She pulled the glove back on. Tomorrow would bring more foreclosures, more families packing their lives into carts. and she would sit behind her window, recording each tragedy in perfect penmanship, while the dust settled over San Miguel Crossing like a shroud. Before bed, she allowed herself one small rebellion from her dwindling personal allowance pin money. Silas called it. She counted out $2 silver and a handful of coins. These she wrapped in a clean handkerchief, along with a small bottle of patent medicine from her cabinet. Tomorrow, when no one was watching, she'd find a way to leave them where the widow Martinez might discover them. An accident, a kindness disguised as chance. The church bell tolled midnight. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house settle, to Silas's snoring through the wall. Somewhere, a door slammed. A dog barked. The town pulled its respectability tight and slept, dreaming of railroad money and progress. But Abigail stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about gray eyes that saw too much and water freely given, thinking about the weight of white gloves and the price of silence, thinking about Jesse Crow, who owed nothing to anyone, who could mount his bay mare and ride toward any horizon he chose. The coyote had gone quiet. Even wild things knew when to hold their tongues in San Miguel Crossing. She turned on her side, pulled the covers high, and began the long wait for dawn. The morning brought another list of names. Abigail copied them into the ledger while Silas met with the railroad representatives in his office. Their laughter carried through the oak door the sound of men dividing up the world over cigars and brandy. She'd left the bundle for Widow Martinez at dawn, tucked behind the water barrel where the woman drew her morning pail. No one saw. In San Miguel Crossing, kindness required stealth. Mrs. Hart. Betty Fletcher from the dry goods store stood at her window, clutching a worn purse. I'm here to make my payment. Abigail checked the ledger. You're not due until next week, Mrs. Fletcher. I know. The woman's hands twisted the purse strings. But with folks being turned out so sudden, I thought I'd best pay early. While I still can. The words hung between them like a noose. Abigail recorded the payment, stamped the receipt. Through the window, she watched Jesse Crow working at the public pump, tools spread on a canvas roll. The mechanism had been broken for weeks, forcing folks to haul water from the river. That drifter knows his way around machinery. Mrs. Fletcher observed. Fixed the Hendersons' windmill yesterday for nothing but a meal. How charitable. Abigail kept her tone neutral, but her eyes followed the precise movements of his hands. He'd removed his jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The pump handle, frozen with rust for a month, began to move under his ministrations. Silas emerged from his office, trailing cigar smoke and satisfaction. Ladies, he tipped his hat to Mrs. Fletcher, who scurried out like a mouse sensing a cat. Abigail, I'll be at the courthouse. The railroad's purchasing another section along the river. Of course. Husband. He paused at the door, watching Jesse work. Sheriff Briggs should move that vagrant along. We can't have every saddle tramp thinking he can set up shop on town property. He's fixing the pump, she said quietly. At no cost. Silas's eyes narrowed. Nothing's without cost, my dear. Men like that always want something. He adjusted his hat. See that you remember that. The door closed behind him with a snap. Abigail returned to her ledger, but the numbers swam. Outside, Jesse had the pump working. Water gushed clear and cold. Children gathered with cups and buckets, their mothers following with larger vessels. He stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, refusing the coins they offered. The wind gusted, catching her handkerchief from the counter. It sailed through the door someone had left ajar, white lace dancing across the dusty street toward the pump. She half rose, then sat back. A lady didn't chase after things. A lady waited for others to retrieve what was lost. But Jesse was already moving. He caught the handkerchief before it could land in the mud pooling around the pump. For a moment, he stood holding it, studying the embroidered swallow in the corner, her mother's work, one of the few things she'd brought to this marriage. He walked to the bank door. Up close, she could see the sunlines around his eyes, the careful mend in his shirt, the steadiness that came from living outside walls. He held out the handkerchief. "Ma'am." Their fingers didn't touch, he was too practiced for that mistake. But something passed between them in the exchange. Recognition, perhaps, or warning. His eyes flicked to her gloves, then back to her face. "Thank you, Mr. Crow." He touched his hat brim. "Jesse Crow. The pump works well. The town is grateful." Town didn't seem too grateful to the Martinez family yesterday. His voice stayed low, conversational. Anyone watching would see only polite exchange. Heard someone left them traveling money, though. Mysterious benefactor. Heat crept up her neck. "How fortunate." "Yes, ma'am. Fortunate." He glanced toward the courthouse where Silas had disappeared. "Your husband's got quite an operation here. Bank, law, railroad, all tied up neat as a Christmas package." Mister, Hart is a pillar of the community." Pillars can be awful heavy, especially when they're holding up the wrong roof. Before she could respond, he touched his hat again and walked away. She stood in the doorway, handkerchief crushed in her gloved fingers, watching him gather his tools. The children splashed in the pump water, their laughter bright as new coins. The afternoon dragged. She processed loans, recorded payments, maintained the perfect posture that marked a lady. But her thoughts kept returning to Jesse's words. The wrong roof, as if he could see the weight pressing down on her shoulders, the architecture of obligation that held her in place. Near closing time, a commotion arose outside. Sheriff Briggs had Jesse backed against the hardware store wall, one hand on his pistol. "Got a complaint about you bothering decent women." "Which women?" Jesse's stance stayed relaxed, but Abigail noticed how his hand hung near his own gun. "The ones whose pumps I fixed, or the ones whose children I watered." "Don't get smart with me, drifter." A crowd gathered. Silas appeared from the courthouse, Judge Palmer beside him. Her husband's face wore the expression of a man watching a chess game play out exactly as planned. "What's the trouble, Sheriff?" Silas asked. "Caught this saddle tramp harassing the ladies. Mrs. Palmer saw him talking bold as brass to your wife this morning." Abigail's stomach clenched. Through the window, she saw Jesse's eyes find hers. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't." "Is this true, Mrs. Hart?" The sheriff turned to her. "Was this man bothering you?" Every eye swung her way. The proper answer was clear. Yes, he was too familiar. Yes, he should be run out of town. Yes, I am a dutiful wife who knows her place. She stepped onto the boardwalk, hands folded at her waist. "Mr. Crow returned my handkerchief when it blew away. He was perfectly respectful." Silence. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The sheriff looked between them, uncertain. "Well," Judge Palmer said finally, "if Mrs. Hart says there was no impropriety, none at all." She met her husband's gaze steadily. "Mr. Crow has been nothing but helpful to our community. The pump works now, thanks to him." The crowd murmured agreement. Several women mentioned fixed gates, mended wheels, small kindnesses. The sheriff holstered his weapon reluctantly. "All the same," Silas said, voice smooth as oil. "Perhaps Mr. Crow would be more comfortable in a town with more opportunities for his kind of work. Cheyenne, perhaps, or Denver. I go where the work takes me." Jesse said, "Still got a few jobs promised here." "How industrious." Silas's smile could have frosted windows. "We must discuss your rates. I insist on paying for the pump repair. Can't have the town beholden to strangers." "No charge. I drink the water too." They faced each other across 10 feet of dust. Two men measuring distances. Finally. Silas nodded. "As you wish. Come, my dear. It's nearly supper time." He took her elbow, fingers digging through the fabric. She didn't look back as he steered her home, but she felt Jesse's gaze like sun on her shoulders. Inside their house, Silas released her and poured himself whiskey. "That was unwise, Abigail. I told the truth. You contradicted the sheriff. In public." He sipped, studying her over the glass rim. A wife's truth should align with her husband's interests. He fixed the pump. Children were thirsty. Children. He set down the glass with a click. "Always so tender-hearted about children. Perhaps if you gave me sons instead of empty beds, you'd understand the importance of maintaining order." The words landed like slaps. She stood perfectly still, letting them fall around her like the dust that coated everything in San Miguel Crossing. "I'll have supper sent to my office." He continued, "The railroad contracts require attention. Don't wait up." After he left, she sat at the kitchen table, still wearing her gloves. Maria, their Mexican cook, set down a plate of stew without comment. The woman had worked for Silas for 10 years, had seen 3 wives come and go death, divorce, and now Abigail's living entombment. "The swallow," Maria said quietly, "is a clever bird, builds its nest in hard places but always finds a way to fly." Abigail looked up sharply, but Maria was already bustling back to her stove. The old woman had noticed the embroidered handkerchief, then noticed, too, perhaps, the way Abigail's fingers traced the small bird when she thought no one was looking. That night, she lay awake listening to coyotes and wind. Somewhere in town, Jesse Crow slept in a rented room or perhaps under stars, free to leave whenever he chose, owing nothing to anyone except his own conscience. She thought about pillars and roofs, about the weight of white gloves and the price of water freely given, about a town slowly strangling on its own prosperity while children went thirsty and families were torn from their land. Tomorrow would bring more names, more foreclosures, more of Silas's particular brand of civilizing, but tonight she allowed herself to imagine different possibilities. A world where kindness didn't require stealth, where a woman's truth could stand on its own, where swallows built their nests wherever they pleased and no one clipped their wings. The church bell tolled midnight. She turned on her side and whispered into the darkness, so quiet even God might miss it. "The pump works now." It wasn't a prayer, it wasn't rebellion, it was simply truth, clean and cold as water from a mended well, and for tonight, that was enough. The basement vault smelled of old paper and secrets. Abigail descended the narrow stairs, lamp held high, keys heavy on her chatelaine. Silas was in Silver City for 3 days' railroad business. He'd said, time enough to face what she'd been avoiding. The secondary ledgers sat in a locked drawer she wasn't supposed to know about, but wives who paid attention learned things. The combination was their wedding date, his small cruelty, making her complicity in opening it. She spread the books across the dusty table, names, dates, amounts, but the numbers didn't match the public records upstairs. Here was Tom Bradley's feed store loan at 12%. The official ledger showed 8. Here were the Johanssons, paying twice what they'd borrowed, interest compounding like tumors. Rail Improvement Fund. The column appeared in every entry, skimming from the top. Money that should have gone to settling debts instead funneled into a separate account. She traced the entries back, page by page, year by year. Always the same, the poor paid double while the railroad grew fat on their suffering. A board creaked overhead. She froze, lamp flame wavering. Footsteps crossed the bank floor, too light for Sheriff Briggs, too measured for a thief. She should call out, should investigate. Instead, she stayed silent among the damning numbers. The footsteps paused, then retreated. The front door opened and closed. Only then did she breathe, gathering the ledgers with trembling hands. Evidence of what she'd always suspected but never wanted to prove. Her husband wasn't just hard, he was a thief wearing respectability like her white gloves. She locked everything back in place and climbed the stairs. On the counter sat her pocket knife, the small pearl-handled blade her father had given her, which she'd thought lost weeks ago. It lay precisely centered, cleaned and sharpened, catching the lamplight like an accusation. Jesse. He'd returned it as quietly as he'd taken it, if he'd taken it at all. Perhaps it had fallen, and he'd simply found it. Perhaps, but she doubted he did anything simply. The next evening, she worked late reconciling accounts. The bank was empty, shadows pooling in corners. She heard the back door, the one that led to the alley, ease open. No honest person used that entrance after dark. He materialized from the shadows like smoke. Mrs. Hart. She should scream, should run, should do anything except sit calmly as he approached her desk. "Mr. Crow, the bank is closed." "I'm not here for banking." He set something on the counter, a worn leather journal. "Thought you might find this interesting. Belonged to Sam Martinez. He kept good records." She opened it with careful fingers. More evidence, dates, and amounts. Payments made but never credited. Threats when families couldn't pay the shadow interest. Sam's careful handwriting documented years of systematic theft. "Why bring this to me?" "You left traveling money for his widow." Jesse leaned against the counter, casual as if they were discussing weather. "Figured you might want to know what really killed him. Wasn't the drought that broke Sam Martinez. Was carrying 2 loans when he only signed for 1. "These are serious accusations." "Yes, ma'am, they are." He studied her, those gray eyes seeing too much. "Question is, what happens next?" "I don't know what you expect." "I expect nothing." He straightened, touched his hat. "Just thought you should know the truth. What you do with it is your business." He turned to go. Without thinking, she spoke, "Your knife." He paused. "Ma'am." "You must have dropped it when you were fixing the pump." She pushed it across the counter. "I had it sharpened." He picked it up, turned it over in his hands. A smile ghosted across his face there and gone like light on water. "My knife's right here." He patted his belt. "This one's got too much pearl for a drifter. Much too fine." Heat flooded her cheeks. Tools are important." He set it back on the counter, handle toward her. "A person should keep track of their tools, never know when they might need them." He touched his hat again and melted back into the shadows. The back door whispered shut. She sat in the lamplight, staring at the knife and the journal, understanding finally what he'd really returned. Not just property, choice. The next 3 nights, she returned to the basement. She copied entries, compared ledgers, built her own record in a notebook she hid beneath loose floorboards in her bedroom. The scope of it staggered her dozens of families, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all feeding the railroad's endless appetite. By day, she maintained her perfect facade. Yes, husband, of course, husband. The white gloves never slipped. But at night, she became an accountant of sins, tallying each theft with the precision she'd learned at her banker husband's side. The 4th night, she found Jesse in the alley when she emerged. He sat on a crate, whittling, bay mare tethered nearby. "You're watching the bank." She kept her voice low. "Watching you." He didn't look up from his work. Man who leaves his wife alone with so many ledgers ought to be more careful. "Why do you care?" Now he did look up. "Sam Martinez was a good man. Taught me to read when I was 12 and riding the rails. His wife taught me to write. I owe them." "So this is about debt." "Everything's about debt in this town." He folded his knife, stood. "Question is, which ones are real and which ones are theft wearing a suit?" She pulled the journal from her coat. "I've been copying entries, building a case, but I don't know what to do with it. The sheriff's bought, the judge too. Who would listen?" "Federal marshal might, if the evidence reached him." "How?" "Mail coach runs tomorrow. Cheyenne route." He stepped closer, and she smelled leather and trail dust. But sending something like that might raise questions, especially if it came from a banker's wife. Then how? Could come from a drifter, anonymous like. Man with no fixed address is hard to question. She studied him in the moonlight. "Why would you take that risk?" Maybe I don't like seeing children go hungry. Maybe I think a woman who leaves secret coins for widows deserves better than white gloves and a thief's name." He shrugged. "Maybe I just don't like bullies with ledgers." She handed him the journal and her copied notes. Their fingers brushed brief contact, electric as lightning. She jerked back, but not before feeling the calluses on his palms, the warmth of living flesh against her prison of propriety. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "So is doing nothing." He tucked the papers inside his coat. "There's a third option, beyond sending letters and keeping silence." "What?" "Leaving." The word hung between them like a door cracking open. "World's bigger than San Miguel Crossing. Plenty of towns need merchants, teachers, good people starting honest lives. I'm married to a thief who's killing this town slowly as poison." His voice stayed gentle, but the words cut deep. "That's not marriage. That's a bill of sale. You don't understand. My family's honor. Your family sold you to pay debts that weren't honest to begin with." He moved toward his horse. "Honor's not about suffering quiet. It's about standing up when standing up matters." "Easy words for a man with no ties." He paused, one hand on the saddle. "You think having nothing makes it easy? Try having something worth saving and watching it die because proper folks decided appearances mattered more than truth." The pain in his voice stopped her cold. "Jesse?" "Mail coach leaves at dawn." He swung onto the mare. "I'll send your papers north. What happens after that is between you and your conscience." He rode off, leaving her alone in the alley with the weight of choice. She climbed the back stairs to her apartment, each step heavy as the years stretching ahead. In her room, she sat at her dressing table and slowly removed her gloves. Her hands looked different now, still pale, still soft, but no longer useless. These hands had written evidence, had chosen truth over comfort, had touched, however briefly, something real and warm and dangerous as freedom. Through her window, the ferry bell tolled midnight, not the church bell with its dry judgment, but the river bell liquid and wild, calling across water to any place but here. She pressed her bare palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. Whatever came from those northbound papers, she would be ready. The swallow on her handkerchief wasn't just decoration anymore. It was a map, pointing toward sky. Silas would return tomorrow. She would smile and nod and play the perfect wife. But underneath the white gloves, her hands would remember other possibilities. And when the time came, if it came, she would know what to do with the tools Jesse Crow had returned to her. The ferry bell rang again. Distant as dreams. Somewhere, a horse and rider moved through darkness, carrying truth in careful handwriting toward justice. And in a narrow room above a bank built on lies, a woman sat with naked hands, learning the weight of her own choices. Silas returned from Silver City with new guards, 2 men with faces like closed fists and guns worn low. They took shifts watching the bank, watching the street, watching her. The walls of San Miguel Crossing drew tighter. "Precautions," Silas explained over breakfast, newspaper crisp between his fingers. "There's been talk of bandits in the territory. Can't be too careful with the town's assets." Abigail spread marmalade on toast with steady hands. Of course, husband. Very wise. But she knew better. The federal marshal in Cheyenne had received the papers Jesse had sent word through Maria's cousin who drove freight. Questions were being asked. Silas smelled danger like a wolf scenting smoke. That night, he announced new rules. "There's a drifter been seen around town. Gray horse, worn saddle. The guards have orders to bring him in if he shows his face." "For what crime?" His eyes narrowed. "For being where he doesn't belong. That's crime enough." She nodded, silent, but after he locked himself in his study, she slipped to the kitchen. Maria was grinding corn for tomorrow's meal, ancient rhythm steady as heartbeat. "The barn behind the old mission," the cook said without looking up. "Where they stored grain during the drought? Nobody goes there now." Abigail didn't ask how she knew. In San Miguel Crossing, women had their own telegraphs silent. Sure, invisible to men who thought only ledgers told truth. She found Jessie there 3 nights later. She'd told Silas she needed air, needed to walk off one of her headaches. He'd waived dismissal, deep in railroad contracts. The guards watched the bank, not the banker's sickly wife. The barn smelled of old hay and mice. Jessie sat in the shadows, cleaning his rifle by feel. His horse snickered soft greeting. "You shouldn't come here," he said without looking up. "You shouldn't be here at all." She stayed near the door, ready to flee. "The guards." "I know about the guards." He set the rifle aside. "Also know the marshal's sending an investigator. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then why stay?" "Unfinished business." He struck a match, let her see his face briefly before shaking it out. "You all right? He hasn't?" "I'm fine." The lie came automatic as breath. "He suspects nothing." "You're not fine." His voice stayed level. "Seen plenty of fine. You're holding on with both hands while the ground crumbles. What would you have me do, pack a bag and run abandon everything?" "Not everything, just the things killing you slow." She moved deeper into the barn, drawn despite herself. "You make it sound simple." "Never said simple, said possible." He stood, and she realized how careful he was to keep distance between them. Professional as a doctor, dangerous as dynamite. "There's a teaching job in Pueblo. School board there doesn't ask too many questions about past circumstances. You've been making inquiries about me, about opportunities. What a person does with information is their choice. Like the information you sent north. That was about justice. This is about survival." He pulled something from his saddlebag, a rolled paper. "Stage schedule. Pueblo wrote, in case." She took it, careful not to touch his hand. "I can't." "Can't or won't. Is there a difference?" "All the difference in the world." He moved to his horse, checking the cinch. "Can't means the door's locked. Won't means you're choosing to stay inside." "You don't understand the consequences." "I understand Sam Martinez is dead. Bradley's living in a tent city outside town. The Johansons lost everything their grandfather built." His hands stilled on the leather. "I understand you sit behind that window every day, watching it happen, dying by degrees. And if I run, he'll find me, drag me back, make an example. Maybe. Or maybe he'll be too busy explaining ledgers to federal investigators." Jessie turned to face her. "Maybe a man who built his empire on looking respectable can't afford a runaway wife. Maybe there are kinds of power besides money and guns." She unrolled the schedule. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 3 chances a week to disappear. "I don't even know who I am without—" She gestured at her dress, her gloves, the whole cage of propriety. "Then find out." He swung into the saddle. "But find out living, not dying proper in white gloves." "Where will you go?" "Around. Got word of work in Amarillo. Man needs a well dug." He touched his hat. "You know where to find me if when things change."
"Jessie,"
she said his name like a key turning.
"in the alley, when our hands—"
"I know." He cut her off, gentle as rain. "Not here, not like this. Not while you wear his name and his ring. But if I didn't, then we'd have a different conversation." He guided the mare toward the door. "About rain on dry earth. About places where nobody asks where you came from. About building instead of breaking." He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against stars. "There's medicine in the feed bin, laudanum and bandages, clean cloth. Don't know who might need tending if troubles comes." Then he was gone, hoofbeats fading into desert silence. She stood in the empty barn, stage schedule crumpled in her fist, feeling the shape of a future she couldn't quite imagine. Back home, she found Silas waiting in the parlor, lamp turned low, pleasant walk. "Yes, the air helped." "Good." He sipped whiskey, studying her. "You'll need your strength. The railroad's announcing expansion next week. Big celebration. Important you look your best.
Of course. And Abigail?
His voice went soft, more dangerous than shouting. If you happen to see that drifter during your walks, you'll tell me immediately. Won't you? Naturally, husband. She climbed the stairs. Each lie another bar in her cage. In her room, she hid the stage schedule with her growing collection of secrets, the copied ledgers, emergency money, her mother's ring that Silas didn't know about. Tools, Jessie called them. She was becoming a woman of tools. The next week passed in careful performances. She smiled at the celebration, white gloves pristine while the railroad announced it was buying more land along the river. The families who lived there sat silent in the back, already calculating what they'd lose. But she watched, listened, made notes in her mental ledger. 2 federal badges had been spotted in Colton, asking questions. The sheriff was drinking more. Silas had moved certain papers to the safe, the one he thought she didn't know the combination to. Thursday morning, she stood at her window watching stage passengers load. A teacher could board that coach, disappear into the territory's vast emptiness, start fresh in a town that didn't know about white gloves and bankers' wives. Not today. But she touched the schedule in her pocket. Promise and possibility in equal measure. The swallow on her handkerchief wasn't just decoration anymore. It was a compass pointing toward freedom, and she was learning to read its true direction. The stage pulled away in a cloud of dust. She returned to her ledger, recording the numbers that would soon testify against the man who called her wife. Each entry was a small betrayal. Each betrayal a step toward truth. Somewhere in Amarillo, Jesse Crow was digging a well. She envied him the honest labor, the clean exchange of work for pay, but she had her own digging to do through lies and ledgers, through fear and propriety, down to the bedrock of who she might become. The guards prowled outside. Silas counted his stolen coins, and Abigail Hart sat at her window, white gloves hiding hands that had learned to hold both secrets and possibilities. The thread between trapped and free was thin as spider silk, but she was learning to follow it. One careful step at a time. The church stood empty at midnight, its door hanging ajar like a question. Abigail slipped inside, bare feet silent on cold stone. She'd left her shoes at home, white kid leather made too much noise, and tonight was for different kinds of steps. He waited by the altar, hat in hand. The moonlight through stained glass painted him in fragments blue shoulder, red hand, gold along his jaw. A man built of broken light, assembled into something whole. "You came," Jessie said. "You asked me to." She stayed near the door, heart hammering. "Your message said it was important." "It is." He set his hat on a pew, careful as handling eggs. Federal marshals arrested 2 railroad officials in Denver. They're coming here next. When? Week, maybe less. He moved closer, and she caught his scent, leather and sage. Honest sweat. "Silas knows. Heard he's been burning papers all day." "Evidence." Her hands clenched. "Without the ledgers." "I kept copies, safe in Amarillo." He stopped just outside touching distance. "But that's not why I asked you here." The ferry bell tolled across water, bronze voice carrying through the open door. Once, twice, marking time like a heartbeat. "Then why?" "Because when they come for him, this town's going to explode. Good folks and bad, all scrambling to save themselves." His eyes held hers steady. "You need to be gone before that happens."
"I can't just—"
"You can." He pulled out a worn envelope. "Train ticket, Pueblo, teaching position still open."
"Jessie."
"Listen." He moved closer, close enough she could see the pulse in his throat. "I've been a lot of things. Ranch hand, railroad worker, man who drifted because staying hurt too much, but I know what matters when I see it." "What matters?" "You matter." The words fell simple as rain. "Woman who leaves coins for widows, who copies evidence with hands that shake but don't stop, who stands at windows looking like a bird that's forgotten it has wings. The bell tolled again. She stepped forward, into the space between proper and possible. In the barn, you said if things were different. They're not different yet. But his hand rose, stopped just short of her cheek. You're still wearing his ring, still carrying his name. Names are just words. She pulled off her gloves. Let them fall. I haven't been his wife in any way that matters. Haven't been anyone's anything except a debt paid in white silk. That's not true. His fingers found hers, careful as handling spun glass. You've been yourself, hidden under all that proper. But there, I see you. What do you see? Sarah. The name came soft as prayer. Your real name, Maria told me. Sarah Elizabeth Thornton, before you became his property. Hearing her true name in his voice broke something inside her. Tears came sudden as summer storm. I'd forgotten she existed. She never left. His thumb brushed her knuckles. Just been waiting for the right moment to remember herself. The ferry bell tolled. Midnight song across dark water, marking the space between one day and the next, between who she'd been forced to become and who she might choose to be. I can't promise anything, she whispered, not asking for promises. He lifted her hand, studied it in the moonlight. Just asking you to stop dying slow, to take that ticket and remember what breathing feels like. And you got business to finish, making sure certain papers reach certain hands. His fingers traced her palm, reading lines like map of possibility. Then maybe I'll drift toward Pueblo. Here they need wells dug. Here there's a teacher there who might need help fixing things. Is that a promise? That's intention. He placed something in her hand, cold metal, small weight. Till then, she looked down, a simple ring, carved from horseshoe nail. Nothing fancy, nothing proper, just bent metal shaped by patient hands into circle of possibility. Jessie, I can't... Not asking you to wear it, just to keep it. Remember there's choices besides white gloves and stolen names. He stepped back, collecting his hat. Train leaves Tuesday dawn. Be on it. If I'm not, then I'll know you chose different. He touched the brim. Either way, you'll be choosing. That's what matters. He walked past her, stopped at the door. Sarah. Yes. That swallow you embroidered, it's perfect. Exactly the right bird for breaking free. Then he was gone. Spurs singing faint music into darkness. She stood alone in the empty church, horseshoe ring warm in her palm, feeling the weight of her own name on his lips. Outside, the ferry bell had gone silent, but its echo lived in her bones now, calling across water to shores she'd never seen. She bent and picked up her gloves, studied them in the moonlight. White kid leather, soft as baby skin, empty as abandoned shells. She left them on the altar. Let God sort out what to do with pretty prisons. The walk home was different. Her bare hands swung free, feeling air they'd been denied. Her feet found their own rhythm without shoes to constrain them. By the time she reached the house, she was Sarah again, wrapped in Abigail's clothes but no longer imprisoned by them. Silas was in his study, burning papers. She smelled smoke and fear, watched orange light flicker under his door. Let him burn it all. The truth had already traveled north, carried by a drifter's careful hands. In her room, she pulled out the hidden cash, emergency money, her mother's ring, the stage schedule with Tuesday circled in hope. Now Jessie's gift, a promise shaped in common metal, worth more than all Silas's stolen gold. She had 3 days to decide. 3 days to choose between the slow death of propriety and the terrifying possibility of life. 3 days to remember what wings were for. At her window, she watched the ferry landing. Sometimes, late at night, she could see the boat's lantern moving across dark water, carrying passengers from one shore to another, from what was to what might be. She thought about Jessie's hands shaping metal into promise, about her true name in his mouth, about the space between midnight bells where women could speak their own vows, make their own choices, remember their own names. The swallow on her handkerchief seemed to move in the lamplight. Wings spread for flight. She picked up her sewing kit, began adding details. Sky around the bird, clouds to fly through, open air for breathing. Tuesday would come with its train whistle and possibility. Between now and then, she had a resurrection to plan. Sarah Elizabeth Thornton had been buried under white gloves and propriety. But she wasn't dead, just waiting, like seeds in drought, for the right conditions to grow. The fairy bell tolled once more, distant as dreams but real as the horseshoe ring in her palm. She held it to the light, seeing not just bent metal but the shape of a different life, one where hands could be bare, where names were chosen, not imposed, where women could love drifters who fixed broken things and weren't afraid of the truth. 3 days. Then she would stand on a platform and choose between dying properly or living dangerous, between Abigail's cage and Sarah's sky. The swallow knew which way to fly. Now she just had to remember she had wings. The trap was set with banker's precision. Silas staged it like a theater piece, the safe door hanging open, papers scattered, the cash drawer emptied. He even cut his own hand, left blood on the metal edge. A masterwork of deception. Robbery. His shout brought the guards running, then Sheriff Briggs, then half the town. By full dawn, the story had spread like wildfire. Jesse Crow, the drifter who'd been skulking around town, had broken into Hart and Railbank. Abigail stood behind her window, watching the performance unfold. Silas's voice carried strong and wounded. He must have been watching, waiting for me to leave. Thank God I returned when I did. Which way did he go? Sheriff Briggs already had his rifle out. North, toward the canyon. Gray horse. Couldn't miss it. Silas pressed a handkerchief to his cut hand, the picture of victimized righteousness. $500 to the man who brings him back. The posse formed within minutes. Men who owed Silas money, men who feared him, men who just liked the hunt. They thundered out of town in a dust cloud of manufactured justice. My dear, Silas appeared at her elbow, smile sharp as filed teeth. You look pale. This must be quite a shock. Indeed. She kept her voice steady. To think he seemed so helpful, fixing pumps and such. Wolves often wear sheep's wool. His hand found her shoulder, squeezed just shy of bruising. I trust you'll testify to his suspicious behavior, all those times he loitered near the bank. If called upon. Oh, you'll be called upon. The squeeze tightened. A wife's testimony carries weight, especially when she describes how a drifter made improper advances, tried to use her to learn the bank's routines. That never... Memory is flexible, my dear, and loyalty is not. He released her, straightened his cuffs. I'm sure you'll remember correctly when the time comes. The day crawled like a wounded animal. She processed deposits, recorded payments, smiled at customers who whispered about the morning's drama. All the while, her mind raced. Jesse was too smart to be caught easy, but the canyon was dangerous territory. One man against many. Near closing, the posse returned. Jesse rode in the center, hands tied to his saddle horn, blood on his shirt. But his eyes were clear when they found hers through the window, alive, alert, playing his own game beneath their game. They dragged him to the jail, crowd gathering thick. Silas emerged to accept congratulations, to paint himself the hero protecting the town's assets. He announced a special evening trial, swift justice for the safety of all. The evidence is clear. He told the crowd, we found bank money in his saddlebags. My wife will testify to his suspicious behavior. By morning, this threat will be eliminated. Abigail's stomach turned to ice. By morning, they meant to hang him before federal marshals could arrive, before questions could be asked, before truth could interfere with Silas's version of justice. In the jail, Jesse sat calm as Sunday morning. Sheriff Briggs had given her 5 minutes, let the lady face her harasser, see him caged proper. Another performance in Silas's script. "You planned this," she whispered once Briggs stepped outside. "We both knew it was coming." Jesse's voice stayed level despite the bruises blooming on his jaw. "Man like him can't let threats to his kingdom stand. The money in your bags, planted neat as roses." He shifted, chains clanking. "Your husband's thorough. I'll give him that. He wants me to testify, say you made advances, used me to case the bank." "I know." His eyes held hers steady. "And you'll do it."
Jesse.
"You'll do it because refusing marks you as sympathetic, makes you suspect." He leaned forward far as chains allowed. "This isn't your fight anymore. Train leaves at dawn. Be on it."
I can't leave you to hang for lies.
"Better than us both hanging for truth." His voice dropped urgent. "Sarah, listen. The papers I sent north included more than ledgers. There's a federal judge who's been wanting excuse to clean house here. My arrest gives him cause to come quick."
You made yourself bait.
"Sometimes that's what it takes to catch the bigger wolf." He smiled, quick and dangerous. "But I need you gone before it happens. Safe before this town explodes."
Testifying against you makes me complicit in murder.
"Testifying against me keeps you alive to teach school in Pueblo." His chains rattled as he spread his hands. "I have survived worse odds. Trust me to survive this."
How?
"Same way I've survived everything else, by knowing when to bend and when to break free." He glanced at the door. "Briggs is coming back. Remember, you're the banker's terrorized wife. Act like it." She stood as the sheriff entered.
I've seen enough. This man will answer for his crimes. That's the spirit, Mrs. Hart.
Briggs led her out, past the gathering crowd.
Your husband will be pleased.
At home, she found Silas in high spirits, planning the trial like a social event. "Judge Palmer will preside. You'll testify, first establish the pattern of harassment, then I'll present the evidence. Clean, quick, final."
Yes, husband.
"Wear the blue silk. Reminds folks you're a lady needing protection." He poured whiskey. "Celebrating early? By tomorrow night, our troubles will swing from a rope." She excused herself, claiming headache. In her room, she packed light-only essentials in a small bag that wouldn't be noticed. The horseshoe ring went in first, then money, then her mother's jewelry, the train ticket tucked in her corset, close to her heart. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing Jesse in chains, calm as deep water while the town bayed for his blood. He'd made himself target to protect her, to bring down Silas's empire. The least she could do was play her part in his plan. The trial convened at 8 sharp in the saloon's back room. Judge Palmer presided with whiskey-flushed authority. The crowd packed in tight, smelling blood and entertainment. Silas had orchestrated every detail from the recovered money displayed on the table to the grieving banker act he performed. "Mrs. Hart." Judge Palmer's voice oozed false sympathy. "Please tell us about your encounters with the accused." She stood, blue silk rustling. The room fell silent, waiting for her performance. Jesse sat shackled between 2 guards, face unreadable. "Trust me to survive this." "Mr. Crow approached me several times," she began, voice small and frightened. "He would appear when my husband was absent, made me uncomfortable with his attention." "What kind of attention?" Palmer leaned forward, eager for scandal.
He would watch me through the bank window. Sometimes he'd speak to me, ask questions about the bank's routines."
She let her voice tremble. "I was afraid to tell my husband, afraid of what such a violent man might do." The crowd murmured approval. Silas nodded encouragement. Jesse stared straight ahead, playing the captured wolf.
And did he ever threaten you directly?
Palmer asked.
This was the moment. Say yes, seal his death, say no, raise suspicions.
But as she opened her mouth, the saloon doors burst open, Federal marshals, nobody move. 3 men with badges and drawn guns. The crowd froze, caught between spectacle and authority. Silas's face went white as his precious papers. Marshal Conway. The lead man's voice cut through chaos. We're investigating charges of bank fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. Mr. Hart, you'll need to come with us. This is preposterous. Silas stood, blustering. We're conducting a legal trial for a crime that never happened. Conway held up a telegram. We've been tracking Mr. Crow's movements. He was in Amarillo until yesterday. 50 witnesses confirm it. Interesting how he robbed your bank while drinking whiskey 100 miles away. The room erupted. Some men tried to run. Others reached for guns. In the chaos, Abigail saw Jesse's guard fumble with keys, saw chains fall away. Their eyes met across the mayhem, one moment of perfect understanding. Go! His lips shaped the word. Now. She slipped through the crowd, out the back door, into the alley where her bag waited hidden. Behind her, San Miguel Crossing tore itself apart, built on lies and crumbling under truth's weight. But ahead lay the depot, the platform, the train that would carry Sarah Elizabeth Thornton toward her new life. She ran through empty streets, blue silk catching on corners, white gloves abandoned in dust. The train whistle screamed arrival as she reached the platform. Dawn painted the desert gold and possible. One looked back at the town destroying itself, somewhere in that chaos. Jesse Crow was playing his final card, surviving as he'd promised, and somewhere else. A teaching position waited for a woman brave enough to claim it. She boarded as Sarah, leaving Abigail Hart buried in the dust of San Miguel Crossing. The train pulled away, carrying her toward Pueblo and possibility, while behind her the ferry bell tolled like a celebration, like a promise, like the sound of chains breaking free. The train had barely cleared the town limits when guilt struck like a physical blow. Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching San Miguel Crossing shrink behind morning haze. She'd left him, left Jesse in chains while she ran toward safety. No! She stood abruptly, startling the other passengers. The conductor was moving through the car. Sir, I need to get off. Next stop's Mineral Wells. Miss, 3 hours. 3 hours. Too long. By then, anything could happen. Federal marshals or not. A mob had its own justice. She'd seen Silas's face when the marshals burst in cornered animal, ready to bite anything close. Please, it's an emergency. The conductor shook his head. Sorry, Miss Railroad rules. She sank back, hands clenched around the horseshoe ring. Jesse had told her to go, planned for her to go, but plans meant nothing if he died making them work. The hours crawled. At Mineral Wells, she was first off the train. The return stage wouldn't leave until tomorrow. She found a livery, traded her mother's pearl brooch for a horse-a-raw deal. But time mattered more than money. The ride back was punishment and purpose. The mare was steady but slow. And Sarah hadn't ridden hard in years. By the time San Miguel Crossing's buildings appeared, the sun was sinking low, painting everything the color of old blood. The town looked like war had visited. Windows broken, debris in streets, smoke rising from the direction of the courthouse. She tied the mare behind the mission and crept forward on foot, blue silk dress torn and dusty. The jail stood empty, door hanging loose, blood on the floor. But whose? She moved toward the bank, staying in shadows. Voices carried from inside Marshal Conway's steady questions, Silas's increasingly desperate answers. Ledgers clearly show a pattern of fraud. Mr. Hart, your signature on every page. Those are forgeries that Drifter must have. The Drifter who was in Amarillo try again. She circled to the back entrance. The one Jesse had used that night he'd returned her knife. The door stood ajar. Inside, she could see the marshals had Silas seated at his own desk, going through papers with methodical precision. But where was Jesse? A hand touched her shoulder. She nearly screamed before recognizing Maria's weathered face. "Senora, you should not be here." "Where is he, Jesse?" Maria's expression darkened. "They took him. During the chaos. The sheriff and 2 others." "Took him where?" "The old mine, where they take men who won't be found." Maria gripped her arms. "Why did you come back?" "He wanted you safe."
Safe isn't living if he dies for it.
Sarah pulled free. "The mine, Silver Creek."
See, but Senora, you cannot.
She was already moving, running through back alleys toward the edge of town. The Silver Creek mine had been abandoned for years, its shaft a convenient place for inconvenient bodies. If Briggs had Jesse there. The moon was rising when she reached the mine works. 3 horses tethered outside, voices echoing from within. She crept closer, blue silk catching on desert thorns. "Federal marshals won't miss one drifter," Briggs was saying, especially when we explained he tried to escape. "Might believe that if I looked more escaped." Jesse's voice, steady but strained. "Right now I just look beat to hell by cowards." The sound of fist meeting flesh. Sarah bit her lip, forced herself to think. 3 men, armed. She had nothing but desperation and the element of surprise. The horses. She crept to them, untied their reins. A sharp slap to rump sent 2 galloping into darkness. The 3rd she kept, wrapping its reins around her wrist. "What the hell?" Men scrambled from the mine entrance. In the confusion, she saw her chance. Jesse was propped against the shaft wall, hands tied, face bloodied but alert. The horses. Briggs and 1 deputy ran after their mounts. The 3rd turned back, saw her, raised his gun. Mrs. Hart. She threw the first thing at hand, a rusted miner's lamp. It caught him in the face, sent him stumbling. Jesse surged up, hands still bound, and drove his shoulder into the man's gut. They went down hard.
Sarah, what are you?
"Saving you." She grabbed the dropped gun, pointed it at the groaning deputy. "Like you saved me." Jesse's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, anger, something softer. "You were supposed to be in Pueblo." "Plans change." She kept the gun steady while he used the deputy's knife to cut his bonds.
"Can you ride?" "Better than I can argue with stubborn women."
He took the gun from her shaking hands. "Briggs'll be back soon." They mounted the remaining horse, Sarah behind Jesse, arms wrapped around his waist. The night swallowed them as hoofbeats echoed from the returning men. Southwest they rode, away from the mine, away from the town, toward the open desert. Miles passed before Jesse pulled up near a creek bed. They dismounted, both breathing hard. In the moonlight, she could see his face clearly bruised, bloodied, but alive. "You came back." He said it like he was trying to understand the words. "Why?"
"Because leaving was supposed to set me free."
She touched his face gently, mapping damage.
"But I just felt more trapped, running away while you faced the consequences."
"That was the plan. Your plan, not mine." She pulled out her handkerchief, the one with the embroidered swallow, and dipped it in creek water. "Hold still." He sat on a boulder while she cleaned blood from his face, each touch careful, necessary. The desert night wrapped around them, vast and quiet except for water over stones. "Silas?" he asked. "In custody. The marshals had him at the bank, going through evidence." She wrung out the handkerchief, watched his blood pink the water. The town's tearing itself apart, everyone scrambling to save themselves or grab what they can. "Good. Let it burn." He caught her hand, stilled its motion. "But you should have stayed on that train."
"No."
She met his eyes steady.
"I've spent 2 years doing what I should. Wearing gloves I should wear, saying words I should say, being the woman everyone decided I should be."
"No more shoulds."
"What about the teaching job?"
"Still there if I want it." She resumed cleaning his wounds. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Let things settle." His eyebrow rose. then winced at the movement.
Sarah, she said it firm as bedrock. You made yourself bait to bring down Silas. I made myself witness to set you free. We're past the point of separate plans.
He was quiet for a long moment. Then,
There's a cabin, south of here, in the canyon country. Man I helped once said I could use it if needed. Remote, safe.
How far? 2 days' ride, maybe 3, depending on pursuit.
She looked at her torn silk dress, her soft hands already blistering from the rains. 2 days in the desert, running from the law and Silas's revenge. A sensible woman would be terrified.
But Sarah Elizabeth Thornton had stopped being sensible the moment she'd left those white gloves on a church altar. Then we'd better get started. She stood, offered him her hand.
Unless you'd prefer to face them alone.
No. He took her hand, pulled himself up.
No more alone.
They remounted, her arms around him again. As they rode deeper into the desert, she felt the last chains of Abigail Hart falling away. Behind them, San Miguel Crossing burned with scandal and justice. Ahead, the canyon country waited with its hidden cabin and unnamed possibilities.
Jesse,
she spoke against his shoulder.
That ring you gave me, the horseshoe nail.
What about it?
I'm keeping it.
She felt him tense, then relax. When the time is right, when we're just Sarah and Jesse, not runaway wife and wanted man, I'm keeping it. His hand covered hers where it rested on his ribs.
That's a promise.
That's intention, she echoed his words from the church.
For now, let's just survive.
They rode through the night, 2 fugitives fleeing toward freedom. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time in their eternal dance. Somewhere behind them, ledgers testified and empires crumbled. Somewhere ahead, a cabin waited to shelter whatever they might become. The swallow on her handkerchief, pressed between them, seemed to fly with each movement of the horse, no longer trapped in thread, but free to seek whatever sky it chose, just like the woman who'd embroidered it. Finally remembering what wings were for. The reckoning came 3 days later, heralded by dust clouds and fury. Sarah saw them first from the cabin's window, 6 riders picking their way through the canyon. Silas led them, his gray suit incongruous against the red rocks, his face twisted with rage that transcended mere money.
He's out on bail,
Jesse said, checking his rifle.
Must have called in every favor, every threat.
How did they find us? Man like him has resources. Maybe tracked the horse, maybe paid someone who saw us pass. He moved to the door. Take the back trail. Canyon narrows about a mile down. No. She picked up the second rifle. No more running separately. Sarah, we face this together or not at all. He looked at her, really looked. She'd traded torn silk for borrowed canvas pants and a work shirt. Hair braided tight, hands steady on the weapon. Not the banker's wife anymore. Something harder, something true. Together, then, he checked the window again. They're spreading out, trying to surround us. The first shot shattered the morning quiet. Splinters flying from the doorframe. They dropped low. Jesse returning fire while Sarah watched the back approach. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. All those hours of precise penmanship translated into precise aim.
Mrs. Hart.
Silas's voice carried across the rocks. I've come to collect my property.
Not your wife anymore. Silas.
She surprised herself by shouting back. Federal marshals have your signature on every crime. Details, paperwork. His laugh was ugly. Dead women can't testify. Dead drifters can't produce evidence. More shots. The window glass exploded inward. Jesse pulled her behind the overturned table. Wood barely thick enough to stop bullets. He's right about one thing. Jesse muttered. Can't hold them off forever. That's when they heard it, the ferry bell. Impossible. This far from any river. But the bronze voice rang clear across the canyon, echoing off stone walls. Once, twice, 3 times. What?
Hoofbeats, thunder in the narrow canyon. The attacking riders turned, confused, as a new dust cloud approached. Blue uniforms caught the morning sun. Federal marshals, a full dozen, spreading out with practiced precision.
Silas Hart, Marshal Conway's voice boomed. You're under arrest for attempted murder, witness intimidation, and jumping bail.
The scene exploded. Silas's men scattered, some surrendering, others trying to flee through terrain that offered no escape. Silas himself spun his horse, spotted a narrow trail up the canyon wall. "He's running!" Sarah was on her feet before Jessie could stop her. She burst from the cabin, rifle raised. "No more running!" Silas turned in his saddle, pistol swinging toward her. Time slowed. She saw his finger tighten, saw the barrel's dark eye, saw her death in his fevered gaze. The shot was impossibly loud. But it was Silas who jerked, who clutched his shoulder, who tumbled from his horse to lie groaning in the dust. Jessie stood in the doorway, rifle smoking. "Should have killed him," he said quietly. "No." Sarah moved forward, kicked Silas's gun away. "Living is worse. He'll face trial, face all those families he destroyed, face the mirror every day knowing what he is."
Marshal Conway dismounted, cuffs ready. "Mrs. Hart, excuse me. Miss Thornton, we've been looking for you."
"How did you find us?" Conway smiled. "Anonymous tip. Someone sent word about Hart jumping bail, heading this direction, even included that bell signal so we'd know when to move in." Sarah looked at Jessie, who shrugged. "Wasn't me. Maria," Sarah breathed. "She must have followed, watched, sent word."
"Whoever it was, we're grateful." Conway supervised as his men secured the prisoners. "Miss Thornton, we'll need your testimony. Your copied ledgers were instrumental, but first-hand witness."
"I'll testify." She straightened. "Decision firm, in court, in public, everything I know. And Mr. Crow was never guilty of anything but helping people." She moved to Jessie's side. "That's my testimony, and I'll swear to it before any judge."
Conway nodded. "Fair enough, though you might want to clean up first. Trial's set for next week in the territorial capital." They watched the marshals lead the prisoners away. Silas silent now. Shoulders slumped in defeat, the man who'd ruled San Miguel Crossing through fear and fraud, reduced to just another criminal in chains.
"It's over," Sarah said quietly. "This part—"
Jessie set aside the rifle, touched her face. "You all right when he aimed at you?"
"I wasn't afraid."
The truth of it surprised her.
For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Just angry, clean angry, like lightning.
"Lightning's dangerous."
"So is living in cages." She covered his hand with hers. "I'm done being careful. Jessie, done being proper, done being anything but what I choose." He studied her, this woman who'd transformed from trapped wife to avenging fury. "What do you choose?"
"Truth, in court and after." She took a breath.
"That teaching job in Pueblo."
"Still yours if you want it."
"I do, but I want something else too."
She pulled out the horseshoe ring, held it up to catch the light.
"This, what it means, what we could build."
"Sarah,
I know we need time, need to heal, to figure out who we are without crisis driving us." She slipped the ring onto her right hand, not a wedding band, but a promise to herself. "But I also know I came back for you, chose you over safety, and I'd choose it again." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the dust settle where violence had bloomed. "Then there's work in Pueblo, wells to dig, things to fix. Man could build a life there, if he had reason." "Is a school teacher reason enough?" "A school teacher who faces down gunmen and speaks truth to power." His smile was slow, real. "That's reason for a lifetime." They stood together in the doorway of the shot-up cabin, watching the sun climb higher,
Behind them lay San Miguel Crossing and all its buried crimes. Ahead waited testimony and trials, but also new towns, new names, new chances to build something honest. "We should check on the horses," Jesse said. "Long ride to the capital. Together. No other way I'd want to travel." They gathered what little they had, including her handkerchief with its embroidered swallow, now stained with his blood and her tears, marked by their journey. The bird seemed to soar despite the damage. Maybe because of it, proof that beautiful things could survive hard use and come out stronger. The ride back toward civilization was different from their desperate flight. No pursuit, no fear, just two people choosing their direction. They talked little, comfortable in shared silence. When they camped that night, Sarah sewn by firelight, adding to the swallows seen mountains and clouds, vast skies for flying. "What are you making?" Jesse asked.
A reminder, she held up the handkerchief, of who I was, who I've become, who we might be. She smiled, needle flashing. "I'm adding a second bird, hawk's mate for life, you know. Do they now?" "So I've heard." She made another careful stitch. "Seems fitting. A swallow who learned to fight like a hawk who remembered how to be gentle." He moved closer, studied her work. "It's good, true."
"Like us. Getting there." He touched the tiny hawk taking shape, one honest day at a time. The ferry bell had saved them, but they would save themselves through testimony and teaching, wells and mending. The slow work of building lives worth living. Tomorrow would bring the capital and courtrooms. Next week would bring Pueblo and possibilities. But tonight, they had firelight and thread, honest words and patient hands. Sarah stitched her symbols while Jesse tended the flames, and both felt the shape of something new being made. Not a cage of propriety or a web of lies, but a chosen bond between equals who'd seen each other's worst and decided to reach for better. The swallow and hawk flew together on the cloth, separate but paired, each free to soar but choosing shared sky. It was a map of their future, stitched in hope and trimmed with hard-won wisdom, and it was enough, more than enough, to carry them toward whatever dawns awaited. The courtyard behind Palmer's saloon had become a makeshift courthouse. Tables dragged out, chairs in rows. The whole town gathered like crows to carrion. Rain clouds built on the horizon, promising the first storm in months. Sarah stood before them all, right hand raised. No gloves, now her fingers bare as truth. "I swear to tell the whole truth, so help me God." "State your name for the record." Judge Whitman said, a real judge this time, sent from the territorial capital. "Sarah Elizabeth Thornton," her voice carried clear, "former wife of Silas Hart." A murmur through the crowd. She saw familiar faces: Betty Fletcher, Tom Bradley back from the tent city, Maria watching from the kitchen doorway, and Jesse, seated with the federal marshals, his steady gaze an anchor. "Miss Thornton," Prosecutor Williams began. "Tell us about the secondary ledgers." She told it all. The basement discoveries, the double entries, the rail improvement fund that improved nothing but Silas's wealth. She pulled out her copied pages, handed them over. Each word another nail in the coffin of Hart and Rail Bank. "And these foreclosures," Williams pointed to the lists. "Were they legitimate?" "No." She found Tom Bradley's eyes in the crowd. Payments were made but not credited. Interest was charged at rates never disclosed. Families who thought they owed hundreds actually owed nothing. "Lies!" Silas erupted from the defendant's table. "This woman is bitter, delusional." "Mr. Hart, you'll have your turn." Judge Whitman said coldly, "Continue. Miss Thornton." She told about the Martinez family, the widow's tears, the way good people were ground down by bad paper. She kept her voice level, but let the emotion show through controlled fire, like Jesse had taught her. "The night Mr. Crow was arrested," Williams prompted, "tell us what happened."
My husband staged a robbery, planted evidence. He wanted Mr. Crow eliminated because—" she paused, choosing words carefully. "Because Jesse had been helping people, fixing things, asking questions. And the federal investigation—" "Jesse sent evidence north, anonymously, to protect the town, not harm it." "She's lying." Silas stood, face purple. "She's been seduced by that drifter, turned against her lawful husband." Thunder cracked overhead. The first fat raindrops fell, but nobody moved. This was better than any theater show. "Miss Thornton." Silas's lawyer rose, oily as lamp fuel. "Isn't it true you abandoned your marriage vows, ran off with another man?" "I ran for my life." She met his gaze steady. "After my husband ordered me to give false testimony that would have hanged an innocent man." "But you did leave with Mr. Crow?" "Yes." "Spent nights alone with him?" "Yes." The crowd rustled, scandal and judgment crackling like lightning, but Sarah stood straight, refusing shame. "I left a false marriage for true partnership, traded a thief's name for my own. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." She looked at the townspeople. "But not as guilty as staying silent while neighbors lost everything to ledger tricks. The witness will stick to facts," Judge Whitman warned. But the damage was done, or rather, the truth. She saw it in faces throughout the crowd. Women who'd endured bad marriages, men who'd lost farms to mysterious mathematics. Understanding bloomed like desert flowers after rain. When her testimony ended, the defense tried to tear it apart, but she'd learned patience at the banker's window, precision at the ledger. Each attack she met with documented facts, dates, numbers. The truth was a fortress, and she'd built it brick by careful brick. Jesse testified next, brief and pointed. His time in Amarillo, the evidence sent north, the staged robbery. He kept emotion from his voice, but Sarah heard it underneath controlled thunder, waiting. Then came the parade of victims. Tom Bradley with his feed store receipts, the Johansson's son with his grandfather's payment records, dozen after dozen showing what they'd paid versus what Hart claimed they owed. The rain fell harder, but nobody left. When Silas finally took the stand, he was already beaten. His bluster crumbled under federal questioning. Documents appeared, telegrams to railroad speculators, secret accounts, the whole architecture of theft laid bare. The bank served this community. He insisted, water streaming down his face. "I brought civilization." "You brought bondage," someone shouted. Then another: "Thief, liar, destroyer." Judge Whitman gavelled for order, but the dam had broken. Years of fear transmuted into fury. The crowd pressed forward, and for a moment Sarah thought they might tear Silas apart right there. Then the ferry bell rang. Impossible, the ferry sat miles away on the river. But the bronze voice cut through rain and rage, clear as morning. Once, twice, 3 times. The crowd stilled. In that strange calm, Judge Whitman spoke. "Silas Hart, I find sufficient evidence to bind you over for federal trial on 43 counts of fraud, plus conspiracy and attempted murder. Bail is denied." The marshals moved in. As they cuffed him, Silas's eyes found Sarah. "You destroyed everything." "No." She stepped forward, rain plastering her hair. "I revealed what was already destroyed. The difference matters." They led him away. This man who'd ruled through fear and paper. The crowd parted, silent now. Some spat as he passed. Others just watched, seeing tyranny reduced to a stumbling figure in the rain. "Court is adjourned," Judge Whitman announced. "Federal administrators will oversee the bank's dissolution and debt reconciliation starting tomorrow." People scattered, seeking shelter from the storm. But Sarah stood in the courtyard, face tilted to the sky, letting the rain wash her clean. Jesse appeared at her elbow, hat shielding her from the worst of the downpour. "You all right?" "I'm free." She laughed, sudden and bright. Jessie, I'm free. No more lies, no more gloves, no more pretending. So what now? She pulled out the crumpled key to Hart's safe, the one she'd carried like a talisman. With all her strength, she hurled it into the storm. It vanished in the rain, taking the last chains with it. Now, she turned to him, water streaming down both their faces. Now we build something true. He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. Starting with this. She stood on her toes, hands framing his face, and kissed him. There in the rain, in the ruins of everything proper, witnessed by thunder and ghosts of the old life, he kissed her back, careful and fierce at once. When they broke apart, both were breathless. That's a good start. He managed. The best start. She took his hand. Come on. Maria promised coffee and dry clothes. We can plan the rest of our lives over something warm. They walked through the storm toward the kitchen's golden light. Behind them, the makeshift courthouse stood empty, justice done and waiting for rain to wash the last bitterness away. Ahead, Maria's door stood open, promising shelter and the chance to finally rest. The ferry bell rang once more, distant and impossible and real as everything that had happened. Sarah squeezed Jessie's hand, felt him squeeze back. Whatever had rung that bell, angels or imagination or the ghost of Sam Martinez, she was grateful. It had called them through the storm to this moment, this choice, this freedom bought with truth. Tomorrow would bring challenges, recovery and rebuilding, teaching positions and wells to dig. But tonight, they had coffee and warmth and the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, the truth was enough to break chains and wash the world clean. The rain fell on benediction and promise, and Sarah Elizabeth Thornton walked through it toward her chosen life, hand in hand with a man who'd taught her that some things were worth fighting for, and that the strongest prisons were the ones we built ourselves. But also, and this mattered most, that every prison could be opened, if you were brave enough to speak the key's true name. 6 months later, the ferry landing at San Miguel Crossing hummed with different energy, where Hart and Railbank once stood. A new sign read, Crossing Community Trust, owned by its members, run by elected board. The Bradleys had their feed store back. The Johanssons worked their ranch. Maria ran the cafe that had been Palmer's saloon. Sarah stood at the landing, watching the morning ferry approach. Her hands were bare, tanned from honest work. The schoolhouse she'd built with Jessie and others sat proud on the hill. Real education, not the lies Silas had peddled. Letter came, Jessie said, joining her. He held an official envelope. From the federal court. She opened it, scanned quickly. Silas got 20 years. Conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, all counts. Good. Also says the last of the stolen funds have been recovered and distributed. She folded the letter. It's really over. That part is. He touched her shoulder. This part's just beginning. The ferry docked. Among the passengers, she spotted a familiar figure, Tom Bradley's daughter, returning from teacher's college. Another educator for the territory. Another seed planted. Mrs. Crow, the girl waved. I mean, Miss Thornton, sorry. I forgot. Sarah's fine. Rebecca. She smiled at the confusion. She and Jessie had married quiet like 2 months back, but she kept her own name for teaching. Some conventions worth breaking stayed broken. They walked Rebecca to the schoolhouse, talking curriculum and supplies. Jessie split off to check the new well system, clean water for the whole town now. Nobody charged beyond maintenance costs. The day passed in teaching rhythms, arithmetic and letters. History told true. Children learning to question instead of just accept. At lunch, she watched them play. Many the same kids who'd drunk from Jessie's repaired pump that first day. Miss Thornton, little Anna Martinez, raised her hand. My grandma says you saved our town. Is that true? Sarah knelt to the child's level. Your grandma helped save it, and Mr. Crow, and Marshall Conway, and everyone who spoke truth when truth was dangerous. We all saved it together.
But you were brave.
I was scared most of the time. Sarah smoothed Donna's hair. But I did what needed doing anyway. That's what brave really means. After school, she found Jessie at the riverside, working on the new ferry dock. The town had bought the ferry service, made it public. No more private tolls bleeding travelers dry.
Good day,
he asked, not looking up from his hammering. The best. She sat on a crate, watched him work. Rebecca's going to be wonderful. And the Hendricks boy finally got fractions. Small victories. The only kind that last. She pulled out her sewing the handkerchief with its swallow and hawk, now part of a larger quilt. Each square told part of their story. Mary Chen wants to add a piece. From her husband's shirt, the one he wore when they got their laundry back free and clear. Jessie paused his hammering. That'll be a big quilt. Time we're done. Big enough to cover our whole bed. She smiled at his expression. What I'm planning ahead. For what? For the life we're building, stitch by stitch, nail by nail. She set down the sewing, moved to stand beside him. Look at this place. Jessie, 6 months ago it was dying of greed. Now children learn. Water flows free. People own their own futures. We didn't do all that. We helped start it, opened the door. She leaned against him. That matters. The ferry bell rang, not mysterious now. Just William Perez announcing departure. But the sound still moved through Sarah like memory and promise combined. I need to tell you something, Jessie said quietly. Job offer came. Railroad wants me to investigate fraud for them. Other towns, other heart types. Good money. Her heart stuttered. Oh. Turned it down. Jessie. Man finds where he belongs. He'd be foolish to leave. He set down his hammer, turned to face her. Unless you want to travel, take your teaching other places. She considered. There was appeal in it, moving through the territory, cleaning out corruption, teaching truth. But she looked at the schoolhouse, the community trust, the children who'd just started to bloom. No. The word came sure as sunrise. This is home. First real home either of us has had. We stay, we build, we show other towns what's possible when people choose community over coin. Even if it's hard. Especially then. She kissed him, quick and certain. Besides, someone needs to keep that bell working. Never know when we'll need mysterious midnight ringing again. He laughed, pulled her close. Think that was really Sam Martinez's ghost? I think it was everyone who ever stood up to power, making sure we remembered we could too. She rested her head on his shoulder. Magic or coincidence? I'm grateful. They stood together as the sun set over San Miguel Crossing. The river ran gold in the light, ferry moving steady across. On the hill, the schoolhouse waited for tomorrow's lessons. In town, people went about the business of free lives, messy, difficult, but their own. Hey, Jessie pointed to the water. Look! A bird skimmed the river's surface, a swallow, probably heading south for winter. It dipped and soared, caught insects on the wing, lived its brief wild life without thought of cages. Sarah pulled out the handkerchief, compared the embroidered bird to the real one. I got it right. Course you did. Jessie traced the stitched wings. Question is, what are you going to embroider next? I was thinking the ferry, and the bell, and maybe the schoolhouse. She folded the cloth carefully. The whole story, piece by piece. So we remember. So our children remember. Our children. She blushed, but didn't look away. Someday, when we're ready, when the town's strong enough to raise them free. Sarah Elizabeth Thornton Crow. He said her whole chosen name like a prayer. You're planning a whole life, aren't you? Several lives. Teacher, wife, mother, keeper of stories. She grinned. Think you can keep up? Think I'd like to try? The ferry bell rang again, calling last passengers. They walked back toward town, hand in hand, feet finding rhythm together. Behind them, the river sang its ancient song. Ahead, windows lit up one by one: the Chen's laundry, Bradley's store, Maria's cafe, their own small house beside the school. Each light a small rebellion against darkness. Each life a testament to what happened when truth broke through. San Miguel Crossing had been reborn through pain and courage. And now it grew toward something unprecedented, a town where power came from community, not coin. As they reached their door, Sarah turned for one last look. The courthouse stood empty. They held town meetings in the schoolhouse now, everyone with a voice. The jail held only occasional drunks. Real crime had faded with fair dealing. And where the bank once loomed, the community trust glowed warm, ledgers open to all. "No regrets?" Jesse asked softly. "None." She squeezed his hand. Every choice led here. Even the painful ones were just steps on the path. Inside, she lit their lamp and started supper while Jesse washed up. Simple domestic rhythm, precious as gold. Through the window, she could see the ferry landing, the place where everything began with water freely given. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Winter coming, supplies to manage, children to teach. There'd be conflicts and setbacks. Humanity didn't change overnight. But tonight, in this kitchen, in this town, in this life built on truth and chosen love, Sarah Elizabeth Thornton knew peace. The swallow had found its sky. The hawk had found his home. And together, they'd found that the strongest structures were built not on fear or force, but on the simple, revolutionary act of caring for each other. The ferry bell tolled one last time, brass voice carrying across water to wherever brave souls might hear it. A reminder, a promise, a call to anyone trapped in cages of propriety or power. Freedom was possible. Truth could prevail. And sometimes, if you were lucky and brave and stubborn enough, you could build a life worth living on the ashes of the one that tried to kill you. In San Miguel Crossing, the lights burned late, and two people who'd started as strangers, a banker's captive wife and a drifter with gentle hands, sat down to supper in their own home. Proof that love could grow even in the hardest ground, if you tended it with courage and watered it with truth. The story ended where the best ones do, not with grand gestures or final victories, but with the quiet determination to wake tomorrow and choose love over fear, community over greed, truth over comfortable lies. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one stitch in freedom's growing quilt. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope the journey of Sarah and Jesse touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please drop a comment below, and let's connect over our shared love of these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of courage, redemption, and romance from the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover these powerful stories from the Old West. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizon.